Hi everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book reviewer behind Utopia State of Mind. Today we're going to be chatting about the three body problem. If you're new here, I have a series where I read a book and then I look at the adaptation and I share my thoughts before, after, about the book, and then about the adaptation as a medium to discuss the book. So I finally got to reading The Three Body Problem, and I listened to this one on audiobook. And the first thing I have to mention before I even talk about the actual story is that the audiobook sound effects were fabulous. I love when there are sound effects to an audiobook. It just creates a super immersive experience. And with this sci-fi, that only heightened the experience and the vibe. So really enjoyed that one. Also, the narration was really good. I I have normally not had an issue with narration, except I just started an audiobook where the narration and the voice effects for certain characters was just, I just couldn't. So while I didn't think it needed to be said before, now I know it does have to be said, and the narration for this one is really good. But let's go to the actual story content. The Three Body Problem is a book that is very hyped. So the basic thing is that I've had this audiobook for a very long time, except a friend of mine recently was about 75% through the book and then was going to watch the show, and they were kind of sharing their thoughts when they were watching the show about it. So I wasn't spoiled by anything. Except for the comment of that there were a lot of the additional characters added who were very white, but I kind of figured that. So wasn't spoiled for the actual adaptation thoughts, but that's kind of how I finally decided, okay, I will jump in. I had thought I could finish the book by the time that so we could all kind of watch the show together. Not what happened. Anyway, let me just talk about the three body problem. I feel like this was intriguing but not captivating. The hype for this one is a lot, and so I really kind of expected it and wanted to be caught up in this obsessive hype that I'd been seeing, and I just really wasn't. I I think my thing was that I felt the characters were very flat. I did not feel like the characters had a lot of kind of I wouldn't say quirkiness, but yeah, like they didn't have a lot, they didn't feel as well rounded as I wanted in terms of whole people. And in terms of evolution as a character, I think it was relatively okay. But the three body problem to me is very plot oriented, very world oriented, and a little bit less on characters. I read primarily for sort of world and then characters and then plot, basically. So, in terms of world, this is really interesting. It's kind of an alternate history account of the world with kind of like a more science fiction spin to it. I appreciated it. There were some aspects though that I still felt were very shallow in terms of what I was expecting for the world building, because it's one of those things where it's similar but not the same. And so then, I was wondering about the implications of, for example, this rippled over. And some of that wasn't really fully actualized, but in terms of world, I liked kind of the concise world building concept. I've read a few books recently which are really struggling from going in two different directions, and so I'm really appreciating a constrained concise world building concept that is well executed. You don't always have to talk about 5 million different things, kind of just shallowly. I really love a succinct concept that is beautifully executed. And while I don't know if this was beautifully executed, I did appreciate the fact that it was a succinct concept in a whole, basically. There was a lot of science, not a huge physics person or kind of like those kinds of things, but I do think it was explained in a really easy to understand way. I feel like maybe though if I knew a little bit more about it, then I would appreciate it more. I'm planning on having my dad read this one, and he is a physicist, so I'll keep you updated in case he really loves it and it's like the science was fantastic. But There are also some really interesting parallels, obviously, between their world and our world. I would say they're relatively similar, except for some other kind of science fiction bends. And it is an alternate fiction world. But yeah, if we go then down from world, which I would say was like relatively okay, I wish it had been better in some places, but it worked overall. Characters number two, as I said, they were just really flat. I didn't root for anyone in particular. I didn't love anyone in particular. It just was kind of a one where these characters were okay. They were there. They were there in the plot. They served their purpose, and that's how it felt. It felt very much like the characters were there to further the plot instead of the plot was happening to the characters, if that makes any sense. And so, yeah, they just felt really flat. I will excuse a lot of things if I can root for and if I can love a main character. I can excuse a lot if I love a main character. And these ones, I just didn't really love them. I wasn't really attached to them. There were things where I was thinking, okay, intellectually, I should be attached to you. Like, you should be pulling my heartstrings, but you're not. Because even the way that you are, for example, describing the way that you should be pulling my heartstrings felt a little bit clinical, felt a little bit like it needed a little bit of depth. So, for example, one of the main characters has I would say, traumatic past with her father, and it kind of shapes who she is and the experiences. And so it's something where we read it, we experienced it, we heard people talk about it, and then it was something where I felt just that loss or that grief or that experience was intellectually and character building wise impacting her, but you didn't feel it, if that makes any sense. So yeah, characters as a second level really fell flat for me. I wish it hadn't, honestly. But then plot wise, so it was also a very slow burn to get to the plot. It took a very, very long time to get into it, but I actually really did enjoy the plot more than I thought I was going to, because it really plays with this idea of revenge and advancement, violence, retribution, humankind as a whole, right? Are we as humankind just sort of inevitably drawn to violence, inevitably drawn to revenge and retribution? Like, I think this is a very universal theme that kind of asks us at the core what happens to our humanity. And I think what's really interesting is that science fiction stories in general push it even further. Because a lot of them are sometimes about, a lot of them are sometimes, oftentimes some of them deal with first contact, especially with science fiction, and when you're thinking about the place of the world within the galaxy, the world within the larger universe, you start to wonder kind of what makes humankind special. For example, I feel like that's something that a lot of people think about now, right? If there was alien life forces, why haven't they contacted us? And so then you start kind of thinking about, and I think this book plays with this universal idea about what makes humankind good and bad, what makes humankind flawed, what makes it, worthy of contact and unworthy of contact. It doesn't even have to be necessarily contact with aliens or contact with anybody else in the universe, but as soon as you start sort of exploring and questioning your place within a broader ecosystem, you start to wonder about your relationship to other things in that ecosystem. And so I do think that the three body problem does that. I also thought the lens of the video game of the three body problem was really fascinating from a writing perspective. I feel like though the video game was kind of just like cross your fingers and hope that the rules and the world will be explained to you, because there weren't a lot of rules and weren't a lot of explanation. And to be fair, I understand that the main character kind of just jumps into this video game, has no concept of what's happening, and everyone's sort of, information is just getting thrown at them. But that's how it felt, and it was a little bit like, whoa, I need to take a step back. But yeah, the plot ended up really taking me by surprise, and I really did like it, but it was a very slow burn to get there, a very slow burn for things to happen. I know this is the beginning, I think, of a series, so it makes sense, why it's a series starter. It's a first book in a series, and so when I do think of it and I reflect upon it, it is important to remember that it's just essentially the introduction. This is essentially the part one, the foundation of the thing that will happen. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Like, I think that I don't remember what I actually ended up rating it, maybe a 3 star. But yeah, I don't know if it was, I don't know if I felt like the hype let me down, but it just wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. I'm intrigued by this series though, because I'm always a little skeptical about adaptations that go directly into the series. I understand that there's always a lot of things that you want to discover, things that you want to talk about and explore and whatever. And so oftentimes the series logically kind of makes sense. You have more space to do it. But I think a series has its own special challenges. You know, you have to keep audiences hooked after the first episode to keep them watching, especially nowadays with streaming and everything. And there just being new launches everywhere. And oftentimes I'll see a launch that I never even heard about and months later. So I think that right now in series world, you really are competing for audiences' time and attention span, because why would they watch the second episode of this series if they could watch anything else? So what we kind of talk about in this adaptation series is the idea of how do you adapt a book to these specific mediums that have their own specific challenges. And so how do you market them to an audience? Do you market them only to an audience of fans of the book, or do you market them to new audience members specifically? This was a very intense conversation in our Hail Mary video, which I will link down below, because the comment section of that, we've been going. And I will eventually be uploading the second part where I watched the movie for that one. But yeah, I'm intrigued for it. I'm going to be watching it this weekend. Not the whole series. I cannot be committing to that. Not the whole series, but at least just the first episode, kind of like what I did for The Expanse. I will try to leave that link down below as well. But yeah, I'm intrigued. You will see me imminently discussing how I felt about the adaptation, but for me, I will see you later as I discuss that. So, I finally now watched the Three Body Problems first episode, and I have a lot of thoughts. So first of all, one of the main things obviously we're chatting about in terms of re-adaptations is how it fits onto the screen. And I will first say that it was chilling when it started. I feel like when I first started reading, the mystery and the suspense and the kind of unsettling eeriness of it really builds up slowly in the book, at least when I think about my experiences reading the book. And for here, off the bat, we're kind of like, it's really bad out here. And so I do appreciate that they obviously have to cut out a lot of that time beforehand. And so in general, it really makes you also think about the control of culture and knowledge. That's a huge theme in the Three Body Problems, but because of the way that it starts off, you really get into it. In terms of how it starts off, I feel like in the actual book, it's a slower build up to all of these reveals, to the reveal of the past, to the reveal of the video game, to the reveal of kind of like what's happening with the sky. I also don't remember the whole wait for me at midnight and you'll see the universe winking at you. It's been a while since I read the Three Body Problems, but I don't remember that. But yeah, there have obviously been some other adaptation changes. Like, what I really liked that you can tell as well, also in the first couple of scenes about the past, was that you can see how rebellious fervor takes hold, and it only becomes real when we can actually kind of like see the actions in front of us. So basically, until we have to reckon with our actions and see that we've actually unalived someone in terms of our rebellion, in terms of our action and the fervor and like the whole crimes and trials and stuff, then you can see everyone's kind of, realization that it just got real, basically. I really liked that because I feel like that's just such a small moment in the actual book, but it's one of the ones from the first episode that really sticks with me. And I think that at the end of the day is a marker of an interesting, at the very least, an interesting adaptation, if not a good adaptation. The way that these moments and these small moments are able to be amplified on the screen and are being able to be interpreted, or in some cases reinterpreted, to make these kind of moments. All the past shots were really interesting. Oh my god, it broke my heart though when you see her take the book in the past because you're like, I know this is bad, you're bad, like I know that this is bad for you to do. At the same time, though, they're in this deeply controlling society where it's kind of everyone for themselves at the end of the day. That is reinforced at the very, very beginning when you see the mom turn on the dad, but I think it's only reinforced when you see him turn on her and you realize that no, like everyone is out for themselves. In general, as well, I I have some truly kind of unhinged notes here, but I think one of the thing as well is that I didn't really realize how much of an issue it would be to see a countdown in front of you all the time. I guess in my mind, I didn't really realize how it would picture out. I have aphantasia, and so books to adaptation thoughts are really interesting to me because I don't picture anything when I read. I just cannot. Like it just doesn't compute. And so for me, it's kind of like, oh, you see a countdown. But then in the actual adaptation, which is why I appreciate adaptation so much in a lot of ways, you kind of see that it would be annoying, so annoying to just see that all the time, and it would really kind of start to destabilize you. And I kind of didn't realize that. Also, I didn't realize it would be all kind of like wavy, swirly electricity type thing. Obviously, I think that that's kind of more an adaptation choice, but yeah, I did not realize how unsettling it would be. And another thing I thought of while I was watching the adaptation was kind of like, my social anxiety could never. Is it a thing for when people take smoke breaks or smoke cigarettes for them to kind of start small talking other people? I could never. My social anxiety would be off of the charts. I basically this never would happen to me. Also, I didn't recognize a lot of some of the stuff that was happening in terms of also maybe the relationships between the people in the present as well. As I said, it's been a very long time since I read The Three Body Problem. And so that could have, also gone to this. I really should be watching these adaptations basically immediately after I finish, but I was not. And so in the past, I didn't necessarily read their relationship nearly as romantic so quickly. I think we see kind of I don't really know how to describe it. I know magnification obviously is the opposite, but the timelines of things are really, really constrained, I guess. And when you're thinking of the adaptation, specifically also about the past perspectives, always I feel like the timelines are constrained more in terms of flashbacks and things like that. So yeah, I also didn't really connect a lot of the dots as quickly in the book as you do in the show because you're really forced to reckon with that quickly. So in general, I did like the adaptation of the first episode. I can only ever attest to the first episode. I feel like I would be willing to keep watching The Three Body Problem on the adaptation front, just because there are some really interesting things. And as I said, some of the adaptation choices I found very intriguing. There are some kind of levity moments when we see the investigation of the scientists, which I don't remember as much of in the book. So that's like an interesting added element to the reaction. I could be saying these things about the adaptation and then everyone could be commenting, oh, this was in the book, this was on page whatever. I feel that it's been a little bit too long since I read The Three Body Problem, but also I don't, I've thought about this a lot when I've thought about the Hail Mary adaptation thoughts, which I haven't filmed yet because it hasn't come out yet. But in terms of thinking about the viewership and the relationship that viewers will have to the adaptation, also the source material. So, for example, someone who has read the source material a very long time ago and is only interested now in the adaptation because years later it's been adapted, I don't think is such a far cry from reality. And also I feel like the video game stuff comes up a little bit earlier in the book, but I could be wrong. And so it is similarly confusing as well. That was intriguing for me to see the device. that we have for that one. So yeah, in general, I thought this was intriguing, and as I said, I'm optimistic about the adaptation as a whole because some of the moments I think are more impactful in the adaptation, at least than in the original source material. And so I'm optimistic that it would continue to be good, but I don't know because I haven't watched it. But anyway, if you've watched the whole season and you've read the book, let me know down below if you think I should continue reading it or if you think I should stop, because I am intrigued to know how it keeps going. But as I said, it's been a while since I've read the adaptation. I was only started this because my friend read it and then immediately watched it afterwards. So now that I've finished watching it, I'll have to text her and ask her what her initial thoughts were on the veracity of the adaptation. But anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this one. This one took me forever to film, so you can tell that my memory super sharp here. Let me know down below what some of your future adaptation wishes are, and if you've read or watched any of these, even if you haven't done vice versa, if that makes sense. I hope you have a really great rest of your reading day, week, month, and year, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!